In professional wrestling, there is one match ending that may forever live on in infamy, which is odd considering that it's been retroactively named after one of the most beloved legends of the ring. But sadly, it's also been used by some as an article of evidence to discredit that exact same wrestler from being a quality booker. Well, I say it's high time to look into this and decide for ourselves, because today, Dave knows the Dusty Finish. Thank you for the support over on Patreon, DEKARI GARMON. For those of you who are not initiated, the Dusty Finish is when a wrestler, usually a babyface, wins a title only to have the decision overturned for some reason, resulting in the championship returning back to its original title holder as if the loss never happened. Now, the credited creator of this ending called the Dusty Finish was naturally Eddie Graham. Yup, not who you were expecting, were you? Okay, so while it is named after Dusty Rhodes, and Dusty Rhodes did book the finish and has also been the wrestler involved in it, the one thing he didn't do was come up with the idea. That would be an honor that goes to wrestler turned booker Eddie Graham. So how exactly did Dusty get his name attached to this in the first place? Well, to answer that, let's get into the history of things. For you see, back in the day, as hard as it might be to imagine now, wrestling wasn't always available for everyone to see worldwide, or even nationwide for that matter. And also, house shows were a much bigger part of the industry than they are now. So when you had a wrestling show, a lot of the time, the only people who saw it were the people who were physically there that night and no one else. And even if it was taped or aired on local television, it still had a comparatively smaller audience. And with that being the case, you could get away with doing a lot of the same stuff over and over again because who is going to know that you did? If you ran a show in Memphis one week and then ran another show the following Saturday in Louisville, you could put on the exact same show with the exact same wrestlers and have the exact same finishes and nobody would be none the wiser. However, there is a limit to this. As the story goes, wrestling fans in the Southeast began getting wise to the operation. Even if you space it out and do it in different cities in the same region, sooner or later people are going to catch on if you keep repeating it. Now, exactly when this happened is hard to say, since the whole point here is that these matches weren't going to be seen by the masses, with residents of some cities claiming that they caught on before other cities did and vice versa. So the exact moment when fans grew tired of this really depends on who you ask. However, all minor debates aside, there really is one definitive show that serves as the moment that wrestling fans everywhere can identify as the tipping point for the Dusty Finish, and that was Starrcade 1985. This all came to a head after Dusty Rhodes was officially made booker following Eddie Graham. Oh, by the way, minor detail, Barry Windham has mentioned that he had the book for a few months in the interim. But back to the lecture at hand. If there was one thing that Dusty knew, it was how to tell a story. And here, everything was in place. Ric Flair, the arrogant highbrow heel world champion, was all set to take a fall to the working man, the everyman, Dusty Rhodes. However, to really make the fans want it even more, Dusty figured to go with the notorious ending one more time. See the hero get screwed in order to make the fans salivate for the moment when he does win it with even greater thirst. So the match went underway. Then towards the end, Dusty went for a pin on Flair only to be shoved off onto referee Tommy Young. And as all three men staggered onto their feet, Dusty accidentally wound up pulling Flair into the referee, knocking Tommy out of the ring and out for the count. At this point, Ole and Arn Anderson saw their opportunity and decided to get involved, to which Dusty had to do his absolute best to ward them off. And then when a new referee came down to the ring, the American Dream, even after getting a high knee to the back by Ole, managed to cradle and pin the Nature Boy for the 1, 2, 3, becoming the new NWA World Champion. That is, until the decision was reversed. It was eventually ruled by Tommy Young as the original official for the match that Dusty would still be declared the winner, but by disqualification due to interference. And since the belt can't change hands by DQ, the title would revert back to Flair. But while this might sound good on its own, this was actually a case of going to the well one too many times. As it turns out, about a month prior in the exact same city, the finish was also used but at a different show. And allegedly, Dusty knew about it, but figured since last time there were different people involved, it was altered enough that they could get away with it. However, that turned out not to be the case. While some fans were okay with it and just shrugged it off as, hey, that's wrestling, others were very not happy about how this turned out. And just like that, with such controversy surrounding it, Eddie Graham's finish definitively became the Dusty Finish, forevermore among the wrestling community. Now, the problem for this event, the way some people see it, was that this was Starrcade 1985 and it was a major show, seen by a lot of people, taking place in two different locations, the Greensboro Coliseum in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia. Yep, that's right, this was done before WrestleMania 2. Anyway, as it turns out, such a high-profile show was a major part of the finish's demise in the eyes of many, with the sheer exposure allowing more people to say to themselves, "Didn't I see this before?" Not to mention that some thought with a show as big as Starrcade, it should have a proper ending and not one with a screwy finish. Especially since it was viewed that Dusty's time had come, with Flair's reign lasting over a year, plus not to mention that the main event of the previous Starrcade also featured Flair and Dusty in the main event. And another problem people have is the logistics of it all. If a referee can reverse a decision after the fact, why doesn't this happen more often? Remember, back then, heels used to win by cheating all the time, so if a ref doesn't see it happen but finds out about it later, why doesn't he just go back and reverse that decision too? If this is an option, how come it only happens for select bouts and it only happens to babyfaces? No, of course, this isn't the only example of this finish. As mentioned, this was done a lot at house shows, and in some cases it was also done for overseas bouts, where the local hero would win a title in his home country while the NWA was visiting in order to pop the hometown crowd, only to get the decision reversed before they went back to the States. And let's also bring up one of my favorite examples of this, Chris Jericho defeating Triple H for the WWF title on Monday Night Raw. I actually think this was a very effective use of the booking, since it worked as a proving ground for Jericho as a world champion. Ultimately, the Dusty finish is as divisive as Dusty was himself as a booker, with people standing on both sides of the line. But how's that really any different from anything else in pro wrestling? But what do you think? Are you pro or con the Dusty finish? And what makes it good and what makes it bad? Let me know down in the comments. And I want to give a big shout out to DEKARI GARMON for your support over on Patreon. And if you would like to support me over on Patreon, you can go over and do that on my Patreon page. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.